Well, folks, Hearthstone's newest expansion has been announced. It's Festival of Legends, and it's music themed. It is basically a big old music festival in Thousand Needles, and all the cards are going to be music themed. We've got legendary performers like the card behind me. We're going to get new legendary spells that are their most popular songs, and some keywords and other fun stuff to get into in this one. I'll break down each of these as we encounter a card with said mechanic. So that said, let's kick things off here with Heartbreaker Hadanis. This is the new priest legendary. This is one of the legendary performers. Each class is going to get one, and each class also has a musical theme. Priest is pop music, so this guy's like a pop star. And he's also introducing a new keyword for priest that is going to be introduced as a part of both the core set and this set. I think it's going to be an evergreen keyword, so they're planning to use this one moving forward. Heartbreaker Hadanis is a 4-mana 4/8. He's got a battle cry that's going to deal 4 damage to this minion, so that kind of makes him a 4/4. But he's got Overheal, which will deal 5 damage to a random enemy. And as you might expect, Overheal is triggered when you heal this minion for more than their total health. So if you heal him for 5, for instance, after he's taken 4 damage, then you're going to overheal him. That's going to trigger the overheal, and that's going to deal 5 damage to a random enemy. So if you're able to play this and then, heal him multiple times past that 8 health total, then you could really start to blow up your opponent's board, including their face, right? Because this is an enemy indeed. So, you could imagine ways to set that up with a lot of cheap 0/1 mana healing spells. If you had something like a location on board that could heal, if you had like discounts to stack up and then just unload, use this kind of a combo finisher style card. And that sounds pretty scary, and it seems to offer a lot of lethality potential as well. So this could be a bit of a combo enabler, turning your healing into crazy face damage, or at the very least, wiping out your opponent's board as well. So that's kind of scary if it gets enough support. Who knows what kind of healing cards we're going to get, or what kind of setup's going to be necessary, because I think this will, of course, require quite a bit of mana, or planning ahead basically to get this to go off in a really compelling way. But you probably don't need a lot of overhealing necessarily to make this feel worth it. It's just, you got to get to that overheal threshold. You got to get up to healing this for 5. So it's going to take some work and some setup and multiple cards, I think, if you really want it to go super well. So yeah, pretty crazy threat, and our first legendary musician. So next up, we've got a legendary song, and each class is going to get one of these as well. They're legendary spells, and this is Death Knights, and it's crazy. This is Climactic Necrotic Explosion. I think Death Knights are heavy metal music, as you might imagine. It is a 10-mana spell. It is triple rune. You have to be a rainbow deck to use this one. It's got lifesteal, and it deals 5 damage. It summons 2 1/1 souls, and it's randomly improved by corpses you've spent. So these numbers are each going to increment randomly. So if you've spent 10 corpses, for instance, your numbers are going to go up by 10 total. So you might gain like 3 damage, for instance, and go up to 8 damage. And then you might gain 2 attack. And I believe attack and health are separate here, I'm told. So, you might go up to 3 attack, and you might gain like 5 health. And you might go up to 5 health. And you're going to get, 8 damage and 2, 3, 5s. I don't know if I did all that math right. Maybe I missed a number somewhere, right? But you get the idea. So you can end up with like 10 damage and 4 minions who are each 4 2s. Or you can end up with 5 damage and 5 minions who are each 2 7s. It's just going to randomly start bouncing up numbers. Now, of course, that has a damage component, though. So if you spin enough corpses, you're eventually going to get a crazy amount of damage. I suspect it's also probably capped at 7 for the summoning. So once you get up to 7 souls, you're probably going to be dumping stuff elsewhere. Now, you only have a 1 in 4 chance, at least early on, to get the damage increase. So, it's not going to be scaling up like crazy right off the bat, but still seems like a lot of potential. So healing in this, crazy board, damage. This kind of has like Denathrius vibes almost to me, where you're just, trying to get this really big finisher that's scaling up throughout the course of the game. So, it is going to require a rainbow deck, which is not always easy to do, but we've seen some lists that are looking decent, and you're going to have enough corpse spenders in your deck as well to really reward this. So there's a few different levers to balance this one and hopefully keep it in check. But I think personally it's still really scary because if it's not killing your opponent, it's also just healing you a bunch and building you a gigantic board. So it doesn't have to be lethal, but it can be. And that makes this, I mean, a super crazy strong reward, I think, for rainbow decks. Next up here, we've got a new keyword being introduced for this expansion. This expansion's keyword is Finale. And the way Finale is going to work is if this card spins the remainder of your mana when you play it, it's going to trigger the Finale bonus. So for instance, if you play here Power Chord Synchronize when you have only 2 mana remaining in your turn, that's going to give you this bonus. If you play it at the start of your turn when you have like 8 mana remaining, then you're not going to get the Finale bonus. Now, this is a 2 mana spell that allows you to choose a minion. You get to add a copy of it to your hand. And then the Finale is going to give both the minion that you've chosen and the one in hand +1/+2. So, of course, you can use this as an onboard buff that maybe generates you another resource. Think about things like Naga Priest, for instance. We're still going to have Nagas in rotation, of course, from Sunken City. So you could like buff a cheap Naga and then get a cheap Naga back in hand to keep your Naga chains activating and going off. So some natural synergies there. You could also use this on your opponent's minions if you wanted to get a copy of something awesome that your opponent played. Hey, rip a Power Chord Synchronize on it. And if you don't care about the stats, you could play it early to not trigger the Finale. So you kind of have a choice. So you don't accidentally buff your opponent's unit. Or for some reason you really want the stats, you could choose to buff your opponent's minion as well. You can't do things like buff it and then play a Shadow Word Death or something to clear it later because you'll have run out of mana if you're triggering the Finale. So there's some interesting little checks there in place for how Finale works and choosing when to use it and when not to use it, and maybe sometimes having some drawbacks if you want to use it as well. But ultimately, this card looks great. A really cheap potential value generator for Priest. Could be some combo setup, getting extra copies of legendaries and stuff that you wouldn't normally have access to. Maybe even getting some discounts and then getting an extra copy of the big legendary dude we already talked about and going absolutely ham, healing those up with AoE heals. Who knows, right? The sky is the limit with these sorts of cards. So it's a pretty cheap way to make extra stuff and potentially some really nice buff synergies as well for early game Priest decks. So looks pretty cool. Here's another example of a Finale card. This is Ghost Rider from the neutral set, a 5 mana 4/4. He's an undead with Battlecry, discover a spell, and Finale, discover another. So if you're playing this like on turn 5, this can be a super value generator where you're getting 2 cards for 1. That's pretty nice to get some open discovers there. But, you know, unfortunately, if you wanted to play this like late in the game to figure out something to do right away, so you're like at 10 mana and you want to play the Ghost Rider and then use the spell that you discovered, you can do that, but importantly, you're not going to get the Finale bonus because you're going to want to save mana to use the spell. So there's this, again, natural check in place here, which I think makes Finale a really interesting keywords in a lot of ways. It could end up feeling restrictive in that regard. Like, is this card powerful enough if you're not recognizing the Finale bonus? I don't know that it is. It feels a little expensive there for a discover, but if you're planning to play it on curve a lot or planning to be ahead enough that you can end your turns with it, because you could choose to end a 10 mana turn with the Ghost Rider as well, that might be fine. But you know, sometimes you're going to need to discover that spell and use it right away. So I do think there's some natural limitations built into these, which makes that keyword pretty interesting. So next up, classes are also going to be getting some instrument weapons. So this, for instance, is the Rogue instrument, the Record Scratcher. I think Rogue is hip hop, by the way. This is a 3 mana 2/2 with Death Rattle, refresh 1 mana crystal. And then if you play combo cards while this is equipped, you're going to improve that number. So you could refresh 2 mana crystals, 3 mana crystals, 4 mana crystals, etc. Which, of course, as we know, refreshing mana can be pretty crazy. So, you know, you're not getting a great weapon out of this as a 3 mana 2/2, but the setup here for plays later could be crazy, setting up big combo turns where you use this to kind of bank mana for the future. You're banking 5-6 mana, and then you've got a 16 mana turn somewhere along the way where you're playing a big awesome thing and then following it up with some extra mana and using that to, of course, probably kill your opponent. So cards like this always look really, really scary to me. It does have this nice requirement. You have to play combo cards. You have to invest in it, so it's going to take some time and some work. Refresh also is a limitation in some ways. You can't cheat things out too early with a card like this. You're just going to have more total mana to work with. So I like that there are some design limitations built in there, but cards like this still look really powerful and really scary to me because extra mana can open up a lot of crazy possibilities. So next up is the Arcanite Ripper, which is awesome. The instrument here for Death Knight, single blood, death rattle, summon a 1/1 lifesteal undead. And if you change your health on your turn while equipped, this will improve the card. So change your health can be, I guess, taking damage. It can be healing yourself. It can be gaining life as well. So change being, I think, a pretty broad term there by design. So I think if you use this to like swing into a unit, that's also going to upgrade the undead here. So potentially getting a nice little body with a bonus here on the 3/2 weapon. 3-mana 3/2s are okay historically in Hearthstone. You know, not quite as good as 2-mana 3/2s like Fire Wax, but they've certainly worked if they have enough upside on the effect. And this feels like if you're scaling this up a few times, it's a pretty good upside. Getting a perhaps overstated minion for 3 on top of this weapon feels pretty good, and the lifesteal could certainly be important as well. So next up here we have dissonant spells. These are spells that swap each turn in your hands, kind of like the Worgen cards from the Witchwood. So here's an example. Harmonic Metal is a new single blood Death Knight spell. This gives 4 random minions in your hand +2/+2, or it could swap and give 2 random minions in your hand +4/+4. And with cards in hand, when they swap each turn, that typically means, each turn you're able to play it swapping. So there will be sometimes if you have big, wide, hands early, you get some smaller buffs. If you have, just a couple minions, you might want to stack up your buffs and get those big 4/4s. Ultimately, this is a little bit expensive for me for a hand buff card. I mean, if you're caring about stats on board, it's sometimes hard to invest in cards like this one because you're not like swinging the board fast enough. Your stats don't really matter. They're not as impactful later in the game. So taking down turns, taking tempo loss turns on a card like this one can be a little bit tough for some of this hand buff stuff, but we do have some Death Knight cards in particular that scale up off of hand buffs, things like the Nerubian card, the Taunt guy that gets extra copies. If you give him +4/+4 and make 2 copies, that could actually be pretty insane and could be on curve. So depending on when this is drawn and when it's swapped, that could offer some potential power spikes on a card like this one. So next up we have soloists. These are musicians who perform alone, I guess, and they get bonuses if you control no other minions. So this is a Warlock example, the Opera Soloist, a 5-mana 4/6 demon, and has a battle cry. If you control no other minions, deal 3 damage to all enemy minions. So really nice little mid-game board cleanup card here. Warlock has tended to like cards like this. It's not quite as big as some other universally type removals we've seen. Things like Entitled Customer in the past for 6 mana could wipe an entire board, but also note, this is not symmetrical. This is just enemy minions. So maybe if you're playing some of your own stuff or have things on board you care about protecting, well, no, that doesn't matter because it's only going to activate if you have no other minions. So the fact that this is not symmetrical perhaps isn't as relevant. I caught myself as I was talking through that. Yeah, no, I don't know. So maybe just not as high impact as I would expect. So I don't know. Still, Swiggy still really efficient. A 4/6 is a nice body to be on this. That's 1 bonus over something like the Entitled Customer of old. So weird to think about in a little bit of a way there that it's only hitting enemy minions because you don't have your own minions anyway. So I don't know exactly why that's like that, but it doesn't matter. Ultimately, probably still a nice little mid-game board swing that certain Warlock decks, control-oriented, will care about. Boy, I thought the review was done, but more cards just keep getting revealed. I think we're gonna have 18 cards at least in this video. This is the One Amalgam Band, a new neutral legendary 7-mana 6/6, all type, of course. And Battlecry gain a random bonus effect for each minion type you've played this game. So I'm thinking the bonus effects here are probably the typical kind of keywords we see for this: Rush, Taunt, Divine Shield, that sort of stuff. I don't know exactly which ones are in the pool, but you could still imagine this monster being, or this minion being an absolute monster of a play, of course, when all those go off, especially if there's anything like Charge or Wind Fury in there, and this could hit for like 12 damage, for instance. That could be absolutely busted. So in some ways, I think we kind of need to wait to see exactly which bonus effects are in the pool. There might be some ways to deduce that based on previous cards using similar wording. If you guys have thoughts on that, share those in the comments below, of course. I'm going to wait to give this a final score, but I do like that this encourages menagerie styles of play. both for other amalgams, but also perhaps other minion types. I'm excited to see that as a potential deck archetype. And since this is a neutral, doing it across multiple classes could be really, really fun. So this card looks like a very fun design for me. Super excited to give all of this a go, but gonna reserve final judgment until I know exactly which bonus effects are in the pool for the one amalgam band. So this next one is Starlight Groove. I guess this like showed up in one of the videos or something. I just saw this on Reddit, but this looks like the legendary song for Paladin. It is a 3-mana spell. It reads, give your hero Divine Shield for the rest of the game. Playing a holy spell refreshes it. So we've been asking for this forever, your hero having Divine Shield. So what that means is basically it will remove 1 instance of damage, much like Divine Shield on a minion. And then, of course, you can refresh that and get 1 Divine Shield per turn, basically, if you keep playing holy spells. Which is kind of cool. I mean, it's really susceptible to small amounts of damage. Things like a single ping, mage is just going to ping off your shield and then hit you with big stuff. So in some matchups, that won't matter much. But if your opponent is really limited in the ways they can deal damage and they only have things that are like big hits, if you're playing a big warrior and they don't have anything small to hit you with or any ping style effect, this could absorb like 8 damage every turn, just an 8/8 hitting you over and over again, which could be really cool. So you can imagine some metas and matchups where this becomes a pretty significant lifesaver over the course of a given game and could really shut down your opponent. Also kind of interesting, I guess, like for fatigue damage late in the game as well. If you're kind of dying to fatigue, you could use this to block a big 10 hit for fatigue or something. As long as your opponent's not hitting you. So some interesting applications for this one. There is a limit on the number of holy spells you're going to be able to produce to keep proccing this over and over again, but I think some well-timed Divine Shields in particular and certain matchups could really work well for Starlight Groove. Next up is the Screaming Banshee, a single blood Death Knight card, 5 mana, 3/6 undead with lifesteal. And after your hero gains health, summon a soul with that much attack and health. So if you heal yourself or buff your health in any way, this is going to give you a way to convert that health into some extra stats. So, if you use Vampiric Blood with this for 7 mana, you're going to get a 3/6 and a 10/10 because you're getting that 10 life sometimes off the Vampiric. So that could be pretty crazy. Now, that said, does a deck that's gaining a lot of life care about stats on board as much? Are you really trying to turn your health into stats all that much? Is that advantageous for your deck style and game plan? Maybe you could convert this into more of a minion based strategy than straight up kind of control attrition like many Blood Death Knights are these days. So it's a possibility. That said, I do think 5 mana is a pretty big commitment to get that rolling, but this does become a threat your opponent has to resolve, or you're just going to keep benefiting over time after multiple turns. You could have crazy free boards off of this if they don't deal with it. So interesting promise on this one. I do think some limitations a little bit for synergy fit and upfront cost, basically. Next up is the Peaceful Piper for Druid, a new 1 mana 1/1. Choose one, draw a beast, or discover one. So, cheap little tutor cards like this can be awesome. If you have any beast you're looking to find specifically, the Peaceful Piper can allow you to do that. You could grab your one amalgam band, right? He's a beast technically. It might not work super well unless you had a lot of other minion types that weren't amalgams, but a possibility to tutor your big win condition there, but doesn't have to be that. So just cheap little cycle like this, get a body on board, and then if you don't have a beast left in deck, this gives you a nice backup plan. Like, I drew my beast already, so I'm going to discover one instead and maybe find something super cool. Things like the Colossal, you could get a Kolake or Kolak if you wanted to. Not the most exciting card still, but a possibility with a card like Peaceful Piper. So this looks really nice and flexible for Druid. Moving on is the Hipster, a new neutral 2 mana 1/3 Battlecry. Discover a spell from your opponent's class that isn't in their deck. So this could be a cool little burgle enabler for cards that care about generating things from other classes, as we've seen certainly in Rogue, kind of a little bit in Priest as well, although this doesn't really play super well to the Priest steely cards we got most recently in Nathria. Those have to be kind of from their deck, but still some interesting applications there. As far as like a general value generator for this one, I have some concerns about the consistency. Class cards are good, but class cards not in your opponent's deck makes me a little concerned that they're not going to be as high quality, because naturally people are going to want to run good cards, and that means you're not getting the good cards in your opponent's deck. You might be getting things that are not good or bad synergy fits. Basically, it's hard sometimes to rely on other classes cards to do good. So I don't think this is as generally useful as a lot of the other neutral discover cards we've had in the past. Things like Venomous Scorpion, for instance, doesn't feel like a replacement for that slot, but maybe has some niche burgle synergies. Next up is Fan Club. Hey, I talked about a potential location healing or overheal guy at the beginning, and this is perfect. You set this up early. You can even set up multiples of these, and then you have some pre-investment ways to support the overheal cards later and proc a bunch of overheal effects in the same turn without having to spend a bunch of extra mana, allowing you to pop off for your big legendary guy, perhaps even more reliably. Now, this is only 3 health, so you'd still need some other pieces to proc him individually, but you can imagine lots of other overheal cards, and this card being a great way to support that. So really nice, cheap, flexible location, synergizing with the new keyword for Priest. I think that sounds cool. Now, a lot of people are going to look at this like, oh, that sucks on its own, right? Like, oh man, in a vacuum, that's not very good. It's not doing very much, only healing 6 for 1 mana. But remember, it is multiple friendly characters, so you can heal minions on board, and then those overheal procs are going to make a card like this, I think, much higher utility. So I think this is honestly rather promising. If you showed me this a week ago, I would have said this is garbage, but with overheal, I'm intrigued. Next up is the Beatboxer for Rogue, a new 3 mana 4/3 mech with combo. Deal 4 damage randomly split among all enemies. So basically some big arcane missile effects here on this body. We've seen some combo synergy stuff teased already. We've seen some mana cheat synergy stuff teased already. I'm curious if with any sort of bounce effects like Shadow Step, you could start having some pretty crazy lethal pushes with this card where it's just hitting face. It can hit minions, but if Rogue's ahead on board, keeping their opponent's board in check with cheap removals and such, Beatboxer could be a nice lethal finisher. Other times could just be that swing on board, chipping off some minions early, but with a potential to get some face damage. Cards like this actually seem to fit a lot of what Rogue likes to do. Maybe a little expensive for Rogue at 3 mana. Something like a 2 that dealt 2 or 3 damage would probably be better, but I'm still intrigued by the Beatboxer here if there isn't some combo, both literal combo keyword potential, but also combo finisher potential on this one. Next up, we have the Brass Elemental for Shaman. This is a weird card. 4 mana 3/3 Elemental with Rush, Divine Shield, Taunt, and Wind Fury. So it just does a little bit of everything. And I don't know. I mean, like, yeah, okay, that takes a nice little swing on board. You know, it's kind of good playing for tempo, I guess. It's, you know, with the Wind Fury, it's kind of scary if left untouched, and you can buff it later with a Bloodlust or something. Like, there's a few intriguing elements there, but I'm not really seeing a real clear direction for this card. Maybe Shaman's going to get some other things that care about keywords or copying minions or some sort of synergy here for the Brass Elemental that makes more sense than just like arena card, because right now this just kind of screams arena card, but doesn't really stand out as a big enabler in standard format, which is what we typically need. And then I think finally our last card here is the Void Virtuoso, a 1 mana 1/3 demon. During your turn, your hero is immune. So of course for Warlock, that can be great with things like your hero power, so you're not taking damage on your hero power. We might also get some other like self-damage synergies that show up in Warlock. That is certainly something the classes have been able to utilize well before. And then I'm thinking about fatigue as well, like you know, late in the game, play for some kind of crazy fatigue condition, destroying decks, that sort of thing. This could help protect you against fatigue. We've seen that in certain combos and such in the past in Wild, I know. So a handful of different directions here for the Void Virtuoso, and being a cheap 1 mana 1/3, that seems like easy to flex into turns for combos, easy to play on 1 and do hero power on 2. So actually looks like a card with some neat potential. And then finally here we have ETC Band Manager, and this card's available right now. If you log into Hearthstone, this is the free bonus card we get when expansions are announced. He's 4 mana 4/4 neutral legendary. While building your deck, assemble a band of 3 cards and then battle cry and discover 1. So this is actually pretty cool. There's like a new little sideboard utility when you add ETC to your deck. It lets you pick 3 cards to go in your like ETC mini deck. So you can choose whatever 3 cards you want, stuff like tech cards, win conditions, you know, varied whatever choices you want. Give yourself an answer to weapons, give yourself an answer to a greedy control deck, give yourself an answer to a aggro deck, and then when you play ETC, you're going to get to pick one of those 3 extra cards. So basically lets you run a slightly bigger deck without diluting your draws, whereas where ETC allows you to just run the ETC and then get one of those cards. Now, of course, this comes with this 4 mana tax. You got to spend 4 mana on the ETC, which isn't going to feel super efficient, but for certain decks that really want to narrow into specific cards and they're really only good in certain sorts of matchups, for instance, this could be a great answer, kind of a meta thing that allows you to pivot your deck in certain ways, but not sacrificing ways to win other matchups. You know, like, I'm going to tech this really hard for an aggro matchup, but I still want to make sure I have a late game crazy value win condition, right? So I'm a Death Knight that's running a ton of aggro cards, and maybe I want even more aggro removal sometimes in my ETC. I'm going to run a bonus AoE in there for ETC, but I'm also going to toss in the Mograine just in case I run into like a long-term deck. I want to make sure I have that Mograine, but I don't want to necessarily sacrifice the option to have more control, more life gain, more removal, whatever it might be. So really just adding sideboards to Hearthstone, which is pretty cool. I think a lot of people are going to have fun trying to find the right stuff for their deck when they toss in an ETC. Of course, not every deck's going to want to do that because they're not going to want to pay the tax for the ETC. They'd rather just draw the card that they want and not have to spend the 4 mana first. So this may be relegated to slightly slower decks, more late game sorts of things, but I do think those decks will care about running ETC. Heartbreaker Hadanis is a 4-star card. Climactic Necrotic Explosion is a 5-star card. Power Chord Synchronize is a 4-star card. Record Scratcher is a 4-star card. Arcanite Ripper is a 3-star card. Harmonic Metal is a 3-star card. Opera Soloist is a 3-star card. Opera Soloist is a 3-star card. ETC Band Manager is a 3-star card. Ghost Rider is a 2-star card. Starlight Groove is a 4-star card. Screaming Banshee is a 2-star card. Peaceful Piper is a 4-star card. Hipster is a 2-star card. Fan Club is a 4-star card. Beatboxer is a 4-star card. Brass Elemental is a 3-star card, I guess. I don't know. Void Virtuoso is a 4-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for our first review for Festival of Legends. Of course, check the Hearthstone website and all that stuff for more details on all these. We're going to have more cards coming up over the next week or two, I'm sure. So stay tuned for more reviews. Share your thoughts on these cards down in the comments below. Thanks much for watching, and until next time, game on.